Good morning, Lakeview. Here are your announcements for this week. Cross Connect is a coffee house for women of all ages and stages. If you're looking to connect, find community, and share life, join us tonight in the lobby at 6:30.
On Sunday, October 18th, immediately following the 11 a.m. service, we will be having our annual general meeting. This will be a short but very important meeting that includes the election of our board members who represent you as a congregation. Childcare is provided, so please be there.
Small groups are gatherings of people within our community that meet together to invest in relationship and to engage Sunday's teaching in a deeper way. They're beginning again next month. Lakeview is a really big community, so if you feel like you're getting lost in the crowd, then maybe small groups are a good option for you. You only need to commit until Christmas. If you're interested, you can email me at allison@lakeviewchurch.com or come and visit me at the newsstand after the service. Lakeview 101 is our membership class. It's for those interested in knowing the whole story, the story of God, of the Free Methodist Church, and of Lakeview. Class is being offered Wednesday, October 7th at 6:30 p.m. Supper is provided. For more information, pick up a card or visit me at the newsstand. And those are your announcements for this week. For more information, visit us at lakeviewchurch.com. You can find the address on the back of your journal.
Welcome. Good to see you. I'm going to invite the ushers to come forward this morning and pick up our morning tithes and offering. Also, as Allison mentioned on the video, if you have not picked up a journal yet, please do so because, yes, the website is on the back in case you cannot remember. Anyways, they're at the doors or it'll be at the info desk from now on out. So, here we go. If you are just joining us, over the last 2 or 3 weeks, we have been unpacking a refreshed mission and postures for our church. And the goal for doing this is so that we can have a unified sense of purpose of who we are and what we're doing and why we're doing it. Last week we talked about being located in God's story or have this sort of backwards leaning posture. And the reason we talked about this is because there's something about being a Christian that where you have to find yourself in what God has already been doing and recognize and know your part in it here in the present. Then we also talked about having this forward thinking, this anticipating God's movements and thoughts. And for us as Christians, that's a calling to be smart, to be intelligent, to be strategic, to face into the hard questions of life, because that's what God is already doing and that's where he's calling us towards. And this morning, as we talk about being inward reflecting and having an outward disposition, I want to remind you that what we're talking about here today is nothing new. I didn't think this up at my desk. This is ancient stuff that Christians and the church have been doing for centuries already. And if you know it or not, you've been doing it as well. So what we're calling us towards as a community isn't to memorize something new, but actually to be aware and to locate ourselves in this backwards and forwards and inwards and outwards and fill in the blanks behind them. And I think a lot of you already know these things already. You've already begun to see that, yeah, I'm sort of doing those kinds of things already. And some of you might be saying, well, Joe, that sounds really like, I don't know, over-spiritual maybe? Maybe it's because, there's just a lot going on there. Can't we just love Jesus and just go along with our lives? Well, yeah, but also no. Because there needs to be a structure. There needs to be a way that we organize ourselves towards these ends. Some of you might say, well, this sounds actually like under-spiritual for me. Like, shouldn't we just be at the whim of the Spirit and just improvise our way along? Yeah, but no. Because in order to improvise, you need to prepare. This is a structure that actually allows us to respond to whatever life brings. And honestly, we are just scratching the surface here in this series. You have no idea how much I've left on the cutting room floor. Maybe 6 or 8 months ago is when I started thinking about this series. So I got this file on my computer. I'm throwing in stories and pictures and ideas and quotes. And we're just opening it up right now. And we'll sort of roll it out as the months and years come along. So you don't have to know everything by the end of today, and there will not be a test. There might be a test. All right. Anyways, this morning we open in Luke chapter 14, a story of Jesus that goes like this. He went on to tell a story to the guests around the table, and noticing how each had tried to elbow into the place of honor, he said, when someone invites you to dinner, Don't take the place of honor. Somebody more important than you might have been invited by the host. And then he'll come and call out in front of everybody, hey, you're in the wrong place. The place of honor belongs to this man. Red-faced, you'll have to make your way to the very last table, the only place left. So, when you're invited to dinner, go and sit at the last place. Then when the host comes, he may very well say, friend, come up to the front. And that will give the dinner guests something to talk about. And what I'm saying is, if you walk around with your nose in the air, you're going to end up flat on your face. But if you're content to be simply yourself, you will become more than yourself. Catch on to those two emphases there. Giving people something to talk about so that you will actually be more than yourself. And what Jesus is getting at here is that he is cutting very deep to the core of our egos and the actions that we take to actually feed and enable those egos. Because sometimes, if we were honest with ourselves, we would readily admit that we are manufacturing a story about ourselves that we actually project out to the world. We want people to see us in a sort of very calculated light. Why? Because we want them to love us and to think that we're great and that we're doing good things and that we've got everything together. If you don't think that's true, have you ever been on Facebook? And I'm not looking down on you if you're on Facebook. Yes, I am. Maybe not. But usually on Facebook, you see things like, oh, look at this amazing vacation I'm on. Or, oh, look how cute my kids are. Look at this thing I bought. Look at this amazing sandwich I'm about to eat. And we project that because we want people to think and know that we've got things together. Rarely do you see people say, I got this weird fungus growing between my toes. Does anyone know what this is? Well, some people do that, right? That's creepy. Anyways, we're projecting a certain version of ourselves. Sometimes it shows up on our resumes, right? You ever written a resume for work? How do you think I got this job? I told a great story about myself. I put in all the right pieces, and then I hired 3 of my friends to be witnesses to that, my references. Because I'm projecting a part of me that I want you to see. It's part of the story. It's not the whole story, though, because no one writes down who they are in their worst days. But you and I both know that on our worst days, we are often trying to be something other than ourselves, or at least we're trying to get attention for all the wrong reasons and perhaps doing things that aren't really necessarily true about us. And that's why it's all the harder when your actual stories and your actual pictures leak out and people see you for who you really are. Then all of a sudden they're talking, but they're all talking about the wrong things, or at least things you don't want them to be talking about. Maybe this week you heard a story about a little car company called Volkswagen. If you didn't catch the story, here's a quick synopsis of it. The company is said to have been caught cheating on American air pollution tests. Volkswagen installed sophisticated software known as defeat devices in the electronic control module of diesel vehicles issued between 2008 and 2015. The software was able to sense when emissions testing was in progress based on the position of the steering wheel, vehicle speed, the duration of the engine's operation, and barometric pressure. Once the software picked up on these inputs, it went into a type of test mode when the front wheels of the car were on the dynamometer. That's how you say it, right? Dynamometer, right? This allowed emissions controls to run full tilt during the official testing, but emitted 10 to 40 times the legal amount while on the road. Now, as I've said before, I drive one of these vehicles. So I got texts and emails from friends across the country and from some of you. I won't name any names, Greg Platt, but yeah, I got some contact. How you doing now? What's up with your car now? Thought you were doing us a favor. Not really. And I felt weird about it. But then when I stopped and thought about it, I said, you know what? If we were truly honest with ourselves, sometimes I feel like you and I are actually equipped with defeat devices as well. But you and I go into this weird test mode when we feel that we are being watched. Because somewhere written into our software is this rogue and evil code that makes us feel like we have to give off the impression that we have everything together and everything is going well, even when it's not. And we try to be something that we're not. And when we try to do that, we're actually less of ourselves. And we end up being far less than we could actually are capable of being. And that's why I think the scriptures call us towards this place where we need to pay attention to our interior life. And perhaps adopting a posture like this one might be able to help us out. Maybe we can be an inward reflecting people, creating space, sacred space to encounter God. We commit ourselves to a personal but not individualistic devotion to Jesus. We also submit ourselves to one another, trusting that in community we meet and hear from God. We position ourselves this way because we know that the defeat code is actually written in our DNA somewhere. And on our worst days, we're out there deceiving others, and we're actually deceiving ourselves. Sometimes we understand it, we know it, we can see it. Other times we can't, but what's true is this, is that we can't fix it or do it or beat it on our own. And this is why we are really intentional about putting that wording in there, that we have a personal relationship with our Creator, but not an individualistic one. Those words are close, but they're actually really far apart. Is it a personal relationship that we have with Jesus? Of course. Yes. How do we know this? Why is it? Because he loves us. He is caring for us. He is attentive to us. He's concerned and interested in us. We are so important to him now, and he intends to be with us forever and ever and ever. There is a personal piece to this. But never at any time has it been individualistic. Because for it to be individualistic says, well, it's just between me and God, and I don't care about anybody else. As long as we're cool, then it doesn't matter. But the truth of the matter is this, is that this can't be right, this can't be healthy, unless this is right, unless this is healthy. Our connection to our Creator is directly linked to our connection and the health of our relationship with others. So when Jesus prays on earth as it is in heaven, that's just not about you, that's not just about me, but it's of the collective of humanity. Or think about it, perhaps in this way, that heaven, on earth or otherwise, happens only when someone is willing to give in. As soon as nobody can afford to lose, you get hell. So, when it's only about us, only about the manufactured image of ourselves that we project, when we allow that evil software to click into full operation, all hell breaks loose, and everybody loses. So to us, the scriptures say this morning, turn off the test mode. Fight that programming inside of you that says, I need to perform when everybody is watching, because that's the only time it counts. Not true. To us, the scriptures say this morning, hey, you want to give people something to talk about? Don't let it be about all your accomplishments and how great you are, how amazing that sandwich is you're eating. But why don't we be in sync with what the scriptures are saying? Jesus says it elsewhere in the Gospel of John. Wow, you'll know them by the way they love one another. Look at the way they love one another. Look at the way they look after one another. Because when we do those sorts of things, we end up being more than ourselves. And that will cause us to give in. Sometimes giving in means, you know what? I bare myself to others. I actually let them in to this interior part. I help them or allow them to help me carry some of this heavy stuff. Other times we give in when we recognize that, yeah, just because we're part of the same community, it doesn't mean that we all like the same kinds of things. But because I love you, and because that's more important than me getting my way, then I give in to that. I submit it in the name of Jesus and because of God's good kingdom. But that's not all. Jesus says a little bit more at this dinner party. He goes on. Then he turned to the hosts. The next time you put on a dinner, don't just invite your friends and family and rich neighbors, the kind of people who will return the favor. Invite some people who never get invited out. The misfits from the wrong side of the tracks. You'll be and experience a blessing. And they won't be able to return the favor, but the favor will be returned. Oh, how it will be returned at the resurrection of God's people. So prior to unpacking this kind of stuff for those dinner guests on that day, Jesus had already been on this wicked tear where he is actually leaning in on and he is calling out all of our favorite things as humans, the things that allow that rogue software to click into place and go unnoticed. He called out those people and calls us out in the meantime, saying, hey, for those of you who are dying to be first, to be at the front, to be the best of the best, if you really want to have life in me, the life that God has in store for you, then actually you can't be first, you got to be last. And if that wasn't bad enough, he goes a step further and says, hey, for those of you who want to be found, for those of you who want to do it on your own, to be a self-made man or a self-made woman where you don't need anybody else, Jesus says, no. If you actually want to win things over, you actually have to lose. Lose yourself in me. And then he goes harder and he says, for those of you who are trying to be big and important, for those of you who want to lead the charge and have everyone look at you, actually, if you actually want to have a good life, if you want to have the life that God intended, you actually have to be the least. Hang out with the least of these. That's how it works in my kingdom. And finally, he says, to those of you who want your life so badly, that you want to live so badly, that you want to make sure that you have the greatest life possible, you don't want anyone to touch that or muddy that up, Jesus says, that's just not going to work with me. If you want to live, actually, you have to die to yourself. So after giving that wicked combination, 1, 2, 3, and 4, Jesus tears in one last time here. And he takes aim at that thing that tries to take a controlling interest in our lives. And he calls it out here as keeping score on others. Because remember, on every front, he's trying to make clear the interconnectedness of this and this, saying our spirituality, our connection with God is directly tied to our connection and love for others. But what stops this from happening in a healthy way is when you and I begin to count beans and keep score on each other. And I'm the worst of the worst on this. Because on my bad days, I will look at somebody, and instead of seeing them for who they are, all of a sudden, all the files come up in my brain and say, I know you. I know who you are. I know what you did. I know the scandals. I know all the trouble. I know what he said and what she said and what happened here. And all of a sudden, I got this picture of you in my mind that I don't generally like. So what happens from there is I just want to create some safe space between you and me. Because I don't want your dirt or your mess to get on to me. So, when we begin to keep score on each other, when we create this distance between ourselves and others, there can be no relationship. And if this isn't working, then this isn't working. If this is out of sync, then this is out of sync. And we've used that language here before, you'll remember. When we talk about being out of sync with God, it's another way of talking about sin, about missing the mark, about things not being as they should be. So maybe this is why Jesus actually calls out and names the misfits here in this story. Because quite obviously, the dinner host had kept some sort of score. There's a reason why those people weren't invited in the first place. So Jesus calls that out and says, the very reasons that led you to not invite people are the exact reasons why you should have invited them in the first place. And the reasons aren't because they're good or because they're fit or because they're worthy or because they've earned it. No, those aren't the reasons. The reasons you should have invited them is because they are human. And what are humans? We're only God's most favorite thing ever. And there's an art to this approach. It's something to be thought through. For me, this summer, my family and I spent a week and a bit in California, and I had the chance to actually visit the home of an architect and designer, husband and wife team, Ray and Charles Eames, that I had been following and reading about for the last 3 or 4 years. And I was really excited to see their space and what they had done and what they had created. And I've sort of done my own little personal research on these people. I've picked up on a few things, the way they approach life or approach their work. And in one article, I'm going to share a clip of it with you in a second here, where Charles Eames talks about this guest and host relationship and how he approached it in his line of work. In short, he said this. He said, one of the things we hit upon was the quality of a host. That is, the role of the architect or the designer is that of a very good and thoughtful host, all of whose energy goes into trying to anticipate the needs of his guests, those who enter the building and use the objects in it. We decided that this was an essential ingredient in the design of a building or a useful object. And I love this approach because you're anticipating, you're seeing 7 or 8 moves ahead of time as to what might actually be happening. You are preparing all the small things because the little details are just as important as the big details. It's smart, it's articulate. You're looking after your guests from the beginning to the end. And all of a sudden you're mindful when they step into your home, let's say, the way it's been designed. How do you want them to feel? Is the entryway wide? Is it small? Is it high? Or is it low? Is it light? Or is it dark? What does that doorknob feel like in your hands? What are you stepping on? Carpet? Are you stepping on something hard? What's the warmth like in the room? You're sort of going ahead of the guest here saying, what can they expect? What do we want them to feel? Better yet, how will we look after them? Because the designer or the architect or the host needs to go to great lengths to make sure that the guest is well looked after. And I think this is directly connected to what Jesus is trying to say here. Because in a sense, for you and I as Christians and as the church, there needs to be an intentionality towards others in the details of how we as a collective body point to Jesus by serving others. So with that in mind, maybe this final posture will be of some help. Perhaps we need to have an outward disposition to collaborate with God locally and globally. We accept God's invitation to participate in the healing of our world. And we welcome spiritual seekers and skeptics and conspire with God in acts of justice and restoration. So from this perspective, and all we've talked about and read so far here today, perhaps what the scriptures are calling us out on this morning is this. We are called to be the best hosts ever. So instead of putting our energies towards keeping score or creating a distance between us and others, perhaps instead our hearts can go out to others and we can be mindful of every little tiny detail, kind of like God is, so that those others can be looked after. Instead, then, we can put our energy towards scratching together this guest list. And in that, we can welcome what? The best of the best, those who are loved, those who are important, those who project a great picture of themselves? No. Jesus says, invite the mess. Jesus says, invite the trouble, invite the chaos, invite problems into your lives. Which sounds totally antithetical to what I actually want to do, because I want to be with the cool kids. But Jesus says, real life is found with the crazies. Join me there. So then, as we recognize this, what are we actually inviting people into? A cool church service? Are we inviting them into this leather-bound book of rules? Are we inviting them to the place where, you know what, we're going to show them how to keep great score on themselves and how to track the scores of others? Instead, as hosts, as servants, in full love and transparency, may we not invite others into a group of people who are projecting themselves as people who have it all together and all the answers. Instead, may we invite them into a collective, into a group of people who recognize their brokenness and their need for a Savior. That's the church. And as we do these things, we invite and we anticipate the needs of our neighbors. And what we're actually doing is inviting them into a healing and redemptive community. Now, in order for something like this to happen, we need to give and give and give and give and give and give a little bit more and give some more after that and give and give and give until it hurts to give. And here's the thing. Every one of us has a part to play. There's a different way that we can give, each and every one of us. For those of you who are here today, who are skilled at making money, you're good at this. You work hard, but it comes fairly easy to you because you know yourself. That's how you've been wired. What does it mean for someone like you to give and 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 give until it hurts? Or for others who are here today who have a certain expertise that could absolutely serve the church in and through this local community, are you playing your part? Are you bringing that piece to the table? Or maybe others, you got time on your hands. What a gift that is. What a gift. What are you doing with that time? Is it all yours? Is it all individualistic? Or is there more to it? What would it mean for you to give and 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 to give again until it hurts? Because here's what I would throw out to you this morning. What could be more meaningful than actually joining in on what God is doing? What could be more meaningful than loving and looking after one another? Because you and I know it well. There's only so many vacations you can go on. There's only so many things you can buy, only so many experiences you can have, only so many things that you can lavish on those that you love before you figure out and ask yourself the question, is that it? There's got to be more to it. There's got to be more to it. As we talked about last week, hey, it's already happening. You and I have already hopped onto a moving train. Or perhaps a better metaphor for us this morning would be to say, the party has already started. You're invited because, why? Because in celebrating their fellowship around the table, the early Christians testified that the Messianic age, often pictured as a banquet, had begun. Or as we've said all month, the renewal of all things is already underway. Will you join in? I'm going to invite my friends Mark and Luke to join me on stage for the last part of our time here together this morning. And like we did last week with Darlene and Allison, I want to unpack just a little bit about how these postures and these thoughts actually play themselves out in a local church setting. So can you welcome my friends here this morning? Guys, thanks for showing up. And Mark, thanks so much for this illness that I'm suffering through today. Kudos to you for passing that along.
You're very welcome.
So, as we talk about these postures, and we'll start off with the first one here, this idea of creating sacred space and recognizing that our faith is personal but not individualistic. Luke, maybe you sort of start us off on that. You look after care and prayer amongst other things here at Lakeview. How do those things play themselves out in our community?
Yeah, I like how you frame that it's personal but not individualistic. And I think to me, there's a paradox in caregiving that when we get into relationship with one another, when we're actually listening and taking time, like this creation of space takes time and energy. Sometimes it takes resources. Sometimes it asks us to lay aside our resources at a point in time. And the paradox to me is that I actually think you can sort of cultivate the interior of your own life in a more authentic way when you're actually engaging in relationship with someone else. So it's like when you externalize things, it actually internalizes it more. You have a mirror in a sense as you're engaging in a caregiving relationship with someone.
Totally. And I think that's really insightful, because sometimes we think that, well, as soon as I get cleaned up and get my life in order and I get growing strong, then I'll be able to serve. But you're suggesting that it's actually in the serving piece that growth and health happens.
Yeah, and I think part of serving is that we're not just exchanging goods. Like, I'm not coming as someone caregiving, whether it's a personal issue or a practical issue, and offering you something. Mm-hmm. What I'm actually doing at baseline is just taking time, being present, showing up. And what happens in that exchange isn't a one-way device. It's actually always this two-way piece, so that actually we've invited the Spirit into that moment, and there's some sort of cultivation going both ways, that I'm reflecting on what I'm trying to offer, and I'm realizing that I'm receiving a lot through your stories.
Totally. So in a sense, I like the way you put it, being present is maybe like the structure, is anticipating is being ready, and it's actually in those moments that we allow God to do his thing, the things that we can plan, organize ourselves for. So that's good. So then, Mark, for you, as you're giving some care right now to the serving local, global, and Lakeview, how do some of these ideas play themselves out in those areas of ministry?
Well, I think in the area of serving Lakeview, as we mentioned in these postures, we grow together. We grow individually and we grow together. And part of growing together means that we're heavily invested in one another. We're wired to care about each other. We're wired to want to rescue and to help people who are disadvantaged. It's the way God made us. It's the way God has his heart towards us as well. So I think as we serve one another, for example, in youth ministry, there are people right now taking care of youth and teaching them. There are people taking care of children and teaching them, investing in children, while you have an opportunity as a parent to be part of this service and to learn and worship in another room. I think it has a big impact in small groups. For some of us, we go to small groups. We're the persons that really need to unload our life of the week, and it's a highlight, and we can minister to one another by being present for those people. We can pray together, we can learn together. So I think as we take a look at the way that we are bonded together as we grow together in a community, everything we do as service in our church plays a part in us in that inward piece as we grow together.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you put it that way, and I think it's safe to say, but in our conversations privately, we talk about this idea of, man, wouldn't it be great if everyone was playing their part and doing their things? Because you're limited to do certain things that you do. I'm the same. I can't do everything. But beyond that, my role isn't the most important. It's not greater than anybody else's. So when we organize ourselves like this way, and serving locally and globally in Lakeview, or creating care opportunities for people either to give or receive, or creating this prayer space for those to be connected in that way, maybe Luke, roll off this here. What does it look like to actually collaborate with God when it comes to care, when it comes to prayer? What does it mean to point to Jesus in serving others here? What do you think?
I think when I heard that question, the first thing that popped into my mind was we need to be listeners. That's like, for me, one of the first steps in collaborating with God is we need to become a group of listeners together. And that's what I think happens so fantastically in the prayer ministry, is that we are posturing ourselves to be listeners, whether it be the group here at the front, in the Sunday gatherings. There's people here who are waiting to listen, and both listen to the requests of others, but also to the urgings and nudges of God. Mm-hmm. There's a group called Telecare who works through, and maybe you've received a call from them in your time here at Lakeview, and they work through the directory, and it creates a space to actually listen to one another in a way that you might not have before. We're also starting up a community prayer related thing where we're going to be talking about how does Lakeview sort of sit within the city? What are the things that we want to intersect with? What are the things we want to become invested in? So again, we're trying to listen, and I think in terms of collaborating with God, that's where I gravitate towards. I'm like, we need to cultivate that sense.
Fair enough. So then, Mark, maybe roll off that, because when we create options, or at least organize ourselves around local or global or Lakeview, how does collaborating with God play themselves out specifically in those areas?
Well, I think there's so much suffering in the world, it's not really hard to figure out what God wants to do and what God is active in doing. And we hear about it all the time. We heard the other day about how the crime rate in Saskatoon is so high, and there's been discussion about what causes that sort of thing. And one of the things that comes up is that there's a lot of youth that don't finish school. and they have a difficult time when they get to the adult age to get a job that meets their needs, that feeds them. So they turn to other kinds of things to come up with income. And that's why we're involved in things like St. John's School. We're trying to make a school that is at risk do better, and to have more of the kids make it through their education so that they have options when they get older. It's why we're in Malenga. That's why we're working in that community, a devastated community, children with all kinds of problems. And we want to help them and those that give care to them. What do we do about the refugee issue? So many people just can't live where they used to live. There's too much violence and illness and war and all kinds of things. So I think we come together and assess what kind of gifting God has brought to this church, what kind of resources God has brought to this church, and see what we can do to help. And that's what we're doing right now. We're having meetings in the next month where we're going to try to figure out what it is that God has prepared us to do that come alongside him and be effective in bringing some relief to communities that are really in a bad shape. If you want to be part of that discussion, fill out a little card, put it in the box at the back of the cattle chute there, and we'll be in touch with you. But it's something that's really important to our church right now. It's a stage that we're at. We want to be able to reach out better to outside of this place, of those people that don't attend here. And it's an important discussion.
Yeah. And I love that. I find that attractive because it actually gives meaning and purpose to everything that we do here. It doesn't allow us to be insular, but it actually throws us out there to do what God is actually doing. So, closing thoughts. We'll give you like 20 seconds each. Just something that our community needs to know in regards to the areas that you look after.
I think just become more invested in people. Baseline, I like this just phrase, just show up a little bit more. Be attentive, whether it's out in the lobby with people that you haven't interacted with on a regular basis, whether it's in your small group. Sometimes we need to listen more, sometimes we need to speak more. It's that being attentive to the group and to the others that you're around. And that also then I think translates into our lives, whether it's in our work spaces, our family spaces, and of course those ministries that we can get involved in here at the church, prayer-related, care-related.
Awesome. Mark, last call.
Yeah, I'd build right on to what Luke said. One of the things that I heard this week was the church is trying to change its posture and should change its posture with regards to the world. I think for centuries that the church has been guilty of having a pointy finger at people in their lives. And I think the more important posture, the more accurate posture for us as Christians is to have a helping hand posture, of being more attentive to people and their needs. And that's who we want to be as a church.
Can we thank these gentlemen for the work that they do here? You good? And as we close up this part of our time here together, I want to remind you that in the seat backs in front of you are one of these Serve Lakeview cards. And again, this is not a guilt trip. This is not a pressure whatsoever. But this is another another opportunity for you. So if there's anything that's been said here this morning, you might say, you know what? I'm curious about that. I maybe want to know more about it. Or perhaps there's another place where you feel you might be able to serve or participate in. Put your info here on the card. Drop it in a bucket or at the info table on your way out. And let us help you find your place. In the next 48 hours, someone from the church will call you and help you get connected. Will you stand with us this morning as we close in prayer together? I'm actually going to ask Luke if he could close in prayer for our community.
Lord, thank you so much for your presence amongst us today. Lord, for teaching us how you want to shape us and grow us as a community. Thank you for the words that are being crafted in terms of the postures. Lord, may these things seep into us so that they are not just words, but become actions and practices, and they actually enact themselves in all our relationships, Lord. Go with us today as we leave this place. In your name, amen.